Hello and welcome to Frost Over the World. Later in the programme, that wonderful French actress, Catherine Deneuve, is here. The Oscar-winning composer, Rachel Portman. Will Greece default on its debts? And will it leave the euro? And we've got the latest from Syria. But first today, the Libyan conflict. This week, the man who until this month headed the Arab League, Amr Moussa, confessed to misgivings now about the air campaign over Tripoli. As a prominent supporter at the outset, important supporter, he seems now to be having second thoughts. So is the campaign getting bogged down? And are Mr Moussa's concerns widely shared? Well, I'm joined here and now by Member of the British Parliament, John Barron, the only Tory MP to vote against the Libyan intervention, and by George Grant, the Director for Global Security of the Henry Jackson Society here in London. Does Amr Moussa's doubts, misgivings, seemingly change of mind make you doubt this venture?
No, absolutely not.
No. Why not?
Well, we went in to Libya on the pretext of preventing a massacre of civilians in Benghazi. Colonel Gaddafi had pledged to cleanse his country, house by house. This was a man who not only said it, showed every intention of doing it. The NATO intervention, well, it wasn't just a NATO intervention, it was a much broader intervention, prevented that from happening, I think, very successfully. I don't think anyone can deny that. The fact that Amr Moussa is having misgivings, I mean, this man is no longer the Secretary General of the Arab League, let's not forget, he's now running for the presidency in Egypt, and perhaps that is influencing his remarks in this regard, I can't say, but no, I'm absolutely comfortable with what's going on.
All right, well, John, you've said before now that the Libyan operation should have been left to the Arab League. Maybe this shows that it wasn't such a good idea to leave it to the Arab League because it would have faltered.
Well, maybe, but at the end of the day, once the dust has settled on this whole affair and people look at Colonel Gaddafi's claims, I think there is at least a question mark as to whether he could have carried through what he promised. After all, this was a man who was having trouble taking the much smaller town of Misrata in the west. To have taken Benghazi, a city of 750,000, much more heavily armed, I think leaves it open to interpretation. But even if you accept that line of argument by NATO, there are many countries in the Arab world, including Egypt, who called for a no-fly zone, who could have put that no-fly zone in very quickly. After all, the Egyptian Air Force remained intact, largely peaceful revolution in Egypt, had an immensely superior air force to Libya, and could have put that intervention in very quickly during the course of an afternoon. So I still believe that those countries who called for a no-fly zone, we could have done more to explore the possibility of them putting it in.
The problem that I think we had is that Colonel Gaddafi, unfortunately, inevitably, did not afford anyone the luxury of conducting a full risk assessment. It happened extremely quickly. I mean, don't forget that Egypt had only just had its own revolution. Whether or not the Egyptians were in any state to be intervening straight away in another country, I highly doubt. Well, and the question here, it was a question of speed, it was a question of time.
Yes, but we wasted
It needed
time,
to happen quickly.
We wasted time getting a resolution through the UN.
Well, you say wasted time.
Well, the bottom
that
line
was quite important, I think, given that this was an intervention in the Muslim world.
It took days and weeks, whereas the Egyptian Air Force, and in fact the Egyptian military, one of the most powerful in the region, had been left intact completely after a peaceful revolution and was perfectly placed to put that no-fly zone in over Benghazi in the course of an afternoon. And that's the point. I mean, this has moved on now. The citizens of Benghazi were saved weeks ago. What we have now here is very clearly a mission creep that has moved into regime change, as we're seeing now. And I think that's one of the earlier comments that was made about the concern about the attacks on Tripoli. This clearly now is about regime change, and that was illustrated by a number of factors, but one of them being the rejection of the African Union peace proposals, which largely mirrored UN Resolution 1973, but it was rejected because it made it did not cater for the removal of Gaddafi. And I think that proves that this mission now is about regime change, and that, in my view, that cannot be a good thing.
What about the ceasefire that people are talking about and so on? Do you think there's any chance of a ceasefire, even without the departure of Colonel Gaddafi? What do you?
Well, I think it's highly unlikely. The Opposition Council rejected the AU resolution precisely because it made no mention of the departure of Gaddafi. at a time when their position was rather weaker. I can't very well see them accepting it now. Maybe I'm wrong. But, I think just on this point, I'll just respond actually to this point about regime change. Well, the fact of the matter is, we went into Libya to protect civilians. What does that rather abstract-sounding term mean? From whom? From the Libyan regime, which is headed by who? By Colonel Gaddafi. Now, unless we are advocating, which I doubt you are, some indefinite intervention in Libya, just a stalemate where British and French and US forces are deployed to prevent a resumption of those hostilities indefinitely, there need to be moves to force a political resolution to this conflict, and Gaddafi can have no part of that. So therefore, I think that regime change to that extent is entirely consistent with the parameters of that resolution.
Well, then in that case, how long do you both think this action will last?
Well, I'm surprised it's lasted as long as it has, because I thought the combined weight of NATO, given that the objective was regime change, or is regime change, they would have succeeded by now. And I think it's surprised our own side how long he has held on. But if I may just respond, regime change is illegal under international law. Let's be absolutely clear about this. And when we had the debate in Parliament, it was very clearly masked in terms of protecting the citizens of Benghazi. Well, they were saved weeks, if not months ago. And what a number of us worry about is the fact that this UN resolution is now being stretched. The credibility of the resolution is being stretched to such an extent that we worry that the Air Force, the NATO Air Force, is now becoming, in effect, the rebel Air Force as it attacks Tripoli. And the comments we heard earlier from Amir Moussa, I think, reflects those concerns.
But at the same time, if it hadn't happened, if there hadn't been that air support for the rebels or whatever, Gaddafi would have taken Benghazi with the resultant murderous numbers of dead.
Well, as I say, I think we need to look at that carefully in the cold light of day, given that he was having trouble taking Misrata. But even if we accept that, David, even if we accept that he would have walked into Benghazi, and as I say, I think that needs to be examined closely, I still maintain that those Arab countries, very powerful, very wealthy Arab countries that called very loudly for a no-fly zone, including Egypt, whose military was largely intact after a peaceful revolution, were perfectly placed and could have responded much more quickly to saving the citizens of Benghazi, because they were right on this doorstep with a vastly superior air force and armoured helicopters and the guidance systems to put those in.
Well, let me put that to you, George. I mean, how long do you think this action is going to continue, is going to have to continue?
Well, I think it will have to continue until such time as Gaddafi leaves power. I think that it is inconceivable that we can walk out now, leaving him there, given what David Cameron, what Nicolas Sarkozy, what Barack Obama has said. I just don't think that it is strategically or morally tenable. How long that will take? Well, I don't think that making those sort of predictions is possible.
So, I mean, we take a summer break after this week's show. We come back in September. Could this still be going on then?
Yes. Of course it could be.
Yes.
Unfortunately, I think yes. And the one reason for that is that this mission has morphed into regime change rather than just about protecting civilians. And I think that, if the NATO Air Force is going to continue to be, in effect, the rebel Air Force as it attacks Tripoli, then I think that's one reason why you're going to see this period of conflict extended. Having said that, it has surprised me, and I think it's surprised a lot on our own side, that Gaddafi has managed to hang on as long as he has.
Just a couple of things to respond to that. I think one of the reasons why this is taking so long is that actually the parameters of this mission are specifically the protection of civilians. And so I think it is quite remarkable and commendable, actually, how careful NATO is being on that front. There is no question that if we were so minded, NATO could remove Gaddafi in 5 minutes, but there would be an awful lot of civilian dead. Now, the fact that it's taking longer because we are protecting civilians, I don't think that is cause for condemnation. I just don't.
All right, well, I'm going to leap in there. Thank you both very much indeed for this discussion.
Yes.
We'll welcome you back in September, it seems.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you.
On Thursday night, EU leaders pledged to deliver up to 120 billion euros in emergency bailout funds for Greece. After winning a pivotal confidence vote on his new cabinet on Tuesday, Greek Prime Minister George Papandreou now has an even tougher task: to carry out a radical remedy of forced auctions and fiscal austerity to secure a €12 billion loan instalment by the 3rd of July. The Greek government is racing against time to fulfil the demands of international lenders and qualify for a new lifeline to avoid default. But many will say default is perhaps the best option for Greece. So, should Greece default and leave the euro? Joining me now is the Daily Mail columnist, Andrew Alexander. Welcome, Andrew. And Petros Fasoulas, the chairman of the European movement in the UK. Petros, welcome too. Let's begin with the magic words of Andrew Alexander here. In his piece this week you say, Greece will default on its debts, leave the euro and return to its own national currency, the drachma. This is one of the certainties in an uncertain world. You're really certain about that?
I'm absolutely certain.
Absolutely certain.
It is possible that Greece could stumble on for another 2 years, being assisted, if that is the right word, in being subjected to even more bailouts and so on, all of which have a high level of debt. It's possible they could stumble on for 2 years, but in the end they will recognise reality, and the reality is independence for Greece, and it will leave the euro, and the people that will scare will not so much commercial banks, which a lot has been made of. The people that will scare is the European Central Bank.
That's a pretty gloomy prospect there Andrew's outlined. I guess you don't agree with it?
No, at all. I think that the future of Greece is well within the Eurozone, both in the short, the medium and the long term. Leaving the currency will be disastrous for the economy. It will be disastrous for the people of the country. So no matter how hard the austerity measures and how painful the medicine is, Greece will take it because the political will exists and its partners are prepared to help it at the time of need.
When you say political will exists, does the will exist among the people of Greece? Everything we read in the papers suggests it doesn't.
There is indeed a lot of social unrest by the section of the population that is bearing most of the pain. There is a view that some of the austerity cuts are unfair, and there is some truth in that respect. And what's necessary right now is to reconsider maybe some of the bailout conditions. The interest rate is punitive. Some of the austerity measures imposed are really hard for a country that is going through a massive restructuring. Maybe the debt could be extended a little bit, or the payment period could be extended to make it a little bit easier for the Greek population to do the necessary sacrifices. But when it comes down to it, Greeks realize that their future lies within the Eurozone.
But you're already asking for the loan and the bailout to be modified because the conditions are too tough for Greece. I agree they are tough for Greece, and this is the reason why Greece should leave on its own. And
sooner rather than later?
Oh, yes.
Better to leave now than in 2 years' time?
We have innumerable lessons on these currency crises, for example, in particular Latin America. And Argentina and Brasilia showed that the longer you stay in a crisis, the worse it gets. Once you know that you can go out on your own and make your own decisions, that's when the country regains its liberty and the chance of economic growth.
And in terms of that, if the default happens, how great will the contagion be, A, in Europe, and B, the world?
Well, the contagion, which is talked about, is about private holders of Greek sovereign debt. I don't know who these people are. I've never met them. Who's balmy enough to deal in in Greek sovereign debt? Not the commercial banks. The only people who are obliged to deal in it are the central banks, in particular, the European Central Bank. Now, that's the organisation which is under threat, and if Greece goes under, and is followed by Portugal and Spain, it's very difficult to see how the ECB is going to survive with any dignity at all.
I don't believe that a Greek default will necessarily destroy the sector. What it will do, it will make the financial service sector lose confidence in the Eurozone as a whole and lose confidence in the other countries that are suffering currently. It will cause panic in an already fragile sector, an unnecessary panic that will start fulfilling its own prophecies without any necessity for that reason.
But how could confidence be any lower than it is already in the Eurozone, particularly at the bottom end?
Well, we are speculating right now what will happen. If the unthinkable actually happens, then we're going to see a pretty serious loss of confidence. Right now it's only speculation, and only a few days ago the idea of a Greek default wiped out billions from the London Stock Exchange. It's a serious threat for the sector, and I don't think we should be toying with notions that are panicking investors.
What about the situation in Germany? Those rumours circulate that they've started printing Deutschmarks again as a sort of insurance policy. I mean, are they likely to do that?
No, I think if the Eurozone breaks up, in fact, as it will, we'll have a hard core, which is France and Germany and the Benelux countries, Holland and so on. I think they will be quite happy to continue with something called the euro, but it will not be the euro as we know it now.
Not be the euro as we know it now. Petros.
I think that the future of the euro will be different, but not for the reasons that Andrew has in mind. There is already a process of restructuring the architecture of the common currency, making it stronger, reconsidering its weaknesses and addressing them. And that is where the future of the euro lies. Apocalyptic predictions don't help anybody. There is considerable work being done by the member states and the European Commission to fine-tune the single currency and make it stronger for the future. And indeed, the euro will be different in the future, but will be stronger, and it will have a long life ahead of it.
More fantasy, I think. But this is a very messy situation. All we have at the moment is Papandreou has got his vote of confidence. We're going to learn yet what are going to be his measures of austerity. Then we've got to learn if Parliament will pass them. Then we've got to learn if Parliament has passed them, can it enforce them? I mean, this is about as uncertain a future as any currency could face.
Well, thank you both. And Petros, you think that the euro can withstand the words of Andrew, even now?
I'm confident that it will.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
US Secretary of State Hillary Clinton has called Syria's military mobilization along the Turkish border yesterday a very worrisome development, fearing such aggressive action, quote, will only exacerbate the already unstable refugee situation in Syria. Since protests began in Syria last March, just under 12,000 refugees have fled Syria, and it's estimated that more than 1,300 civilians have been killed by government forces. On Monday, President Assad made his third speech to the nation. His third speech, in fact, since the protests started. He promised reforms and went on to grant a general amnesty. But all too vague, many people said, too vague. But is it indeed also too little too late? I'm joined now by Munza Eid Alzam Al-Khani, who's an exiled Syrian opposition activist, and he's now currently at the University of St Andrews, and he's here to discuss this week's events and what we can expect in the coming months, or maybe years, if the thing goes on that long. Welcome. It's very good to have you with us, Munza. We're delighted. Let's start with the basic question. The speech, the big speech he made this week, the third speech, big speech. Did you find it sincere, adequate, and did you find the words of reform were just words? What were you encouraged by it?
Well, I don't think so. It's not really responding to the needs of the people. People need sincere change. People need sincere reform from the beginning of the start of the revolution, if you want to call it revolution. But he was, first of all, he didn't respond. He responded by, in the first speech, and the second speech, and the third speech, as you mentioned. His response does not at all touch the needs of the people.
You mean there's not enough detail there, or specific promises?
Exactly. He just started speaking about dialogue. He's spoken too much about dialogue in the third speech. And before speaking about dialogue, you should stop the military action against your people. So stop military action, then talk about dialogue. Then people might agree or not agree. And as far as I know, people on the ground, they say no way for dialogue. So for that reason, when I'm saying he's not really in touch directly with his own people.
Well, so does this mean that he can't it's too late now for him to turn things around? Or could he still change his fortunes by convincing reform?
I think it's too late. There is no return for him to go back before the 15th of March 2011. I think from the beginning he made big mistakes. He didn't respond. He responded with fire. People from the beginning wasn't asking about the change of the regime or regime change. They were asking for freedom, democracy, multi-party ruling, something like that. But he responded with fire. Now the demands of the people went further and further. They are now asking for a regime change and nothing less than that.
Nothing less than regime change. Can they get it, though?
I think they can, but they
Really?
need to be patient.
Yeah.
They need the people.
Well,
they need to be patient. And
who's actually winning at the moment? I mean, who's winning on points in the 12th round, as it were?
I think the people are winning, but
Really?
they are paying the cost. People are winning. There's no doubt about it. We can see from his speech. He said the economy is struggling. The security apparatus are struggling, are exhausted now. So for that reason, he talked too much about the dialogue. He needs the people to calm down. So
But it seems as though there's a lot of demonstrations that are pro-Assad, or do you think they're rigged?
well, we can't say it's pro-Assad. There is no doubt there is people benefiting from this regime, and they need this regime to be forever. There's no doubt about it. But I can't assure you that they are not the majority of the people. Even I can say they are the minority of the people who are supporting Assad.
So some people say that Ramadan will be crucial in this because large groups of people gather together in mosques and so on and so forth, just a situation that the regime has been trying to avoid.
Exactly. This is the very important point, by the way. In Ramadan, we have every day like Friday. There is every day that's gathering, evening time. So the Friday will be every day from Ramadan till the end of Ramadan, every day the same as Friday. Now we're having every week there's a Friday. Every day in Ramadan will be the same as a Friday. The gathering of people, thousands of people gathering in the mosques so they can out for demonstration after they finish praying.
Right. Well, thank you very much indeed. In a second, just tell me in a second what you think. How long do you think President Assad will be in power?
I think in the people's eyes, he lost the legitimacy. He's not a legitimate leader anymore. I think he will stay in power. It's a matter of months, not more.
A matter of months.
A matter of months.
Thank you very much.
You're most
indeed.
welcome.
Very good to have you
Thank
with
you
us.
very much.
In a moment, a slight contrast. The great French actress Catherine Deneuve. I think that is a slight contrast, don't you think? Yeah. We'll take a short break and we'll be back.